Hi guys, how are you all? This one story is about something that might happen to you tonight or has happened countless times before. You fall asleep easily enough, drift off into peaceful darkness, and then suddenly you're awake, wide awake. It's 2 a.m., maybe 3 a.m., and you're just up. Your mind is clear, you're not anxious, you don't need the bathroom, you're just awake. And you lie there wondering what's wrong with you, why you can't sleep through the night like a normal person. But here's the thing, you are sleeping like a normal person. You're sleeping like humans slept for thousands of years before electric lights and alarm clocks changed everything. That 2 a.m. wake up? That's not insomnia, that's not a sleep disorder. That's your body doing exactly what it evolved to do, following a pattern so deeply embedded in human biology that we're only now beginning to understand what we lost when we started trying to sleep straight through the night. For most of human history, people didn't sleep the way we think we should sleep now. They didn't go to bed at 10 p.m. and wake up at 6 a.m. in one continuous 8-hour block. That's a modern invention, less than 100 years old, a product of industrialization and artificial lighting. Before that, for thousands of years, humans practiced what's called biphasic or segmented sleep. They slept in two distinct periods with a period of quiet wakefulness in between. And this wasn't some unusual practice limited to certain cultures or time periods. This was universal, the default human sleep pattern, documented across continents and centuries. From medieval Europe to tribal Africa, from ancient Rome to pre-industrial Japan, humans slept the same way. First sleep, then wakefulness, then second sleep. The first sleep began shortly after darkness fell, usually around 8 or 9 p.m. in winter, maybe a bit later in summer when days were longer. People would retire to their sleeping spaces, whether that was a bed, a mat on the floor, or a pile of straw, and they'd sleep deeply for about 4 hours. This first sleep was solid, restorative, the deepest sleep of the night. During this time, the body did its essential repair work. The mind processed the day's experiences, dreams were vivid. Then around midnight or 1 a.m., people would naturally wake up, not startled awake, not troubled, just gently surfacing from sleep into a calm, peaceful wakefulness. And this was completely normal, expected, even pleasant. This period between first and second sleep had its own name in many languages. In medieval English, it was called the watching. In French, dorveil. This wasn't an inconvenience, it was a recognized part of the night, a special time with its own character and purposes. The watching typically lasted 1 to 2 hours. During this time, people were awake but relaxed, lying in their beds or getting up for various activities. The darkness was complete, or nearly so, with perhaps a banked fire providing minimal light. There was no urgency to fall back asleep immediately, no anxiety about being awake. People simply existed in this quiet interval, and when they felt ready, they'd naturally drift back into second sleep. Second sleep lasted another 3 to 4 hours, carrying people through to dawn. This sleep was lighter than first sleep, with more dreams, more awareness of surroundings. People would wake from second sleep as light appeared, ready to start their day. The total sleep time was 7 to 8 hours, the same as we aim for now, just organized differently, with that wakeful interval in the middle.
Now, what's remarkable is how casually this pattern appears in historical documents. Medieval legal depositions mention people traveling after first sleep. Medical texts give advice about activities suitable during the watching. Prayer books include special prayers meant to be said in the middle of the night. Literary works reference characters waking between sleeps as if everyone would know exactly what that meant because everyone did. The Canterbury Tales, written in the 14th century, mentions first sleep casually, assuming readers would understand. A 15th century Scottish legal deposition describes someone committing a crime after first sleep. A 16th century doctor's manual suggests that couples should have intimate relations during the watching period because both partners would be rested from first sleep but not yet tired. These references are everywhere once you start looking, scattered through centuries of documents, all treating segmented sleep as completely normal. But modern historians didn't notice this pattern for a long time. They'd read these references to first sleep and second sleep and just assume people were talking about naps or unusual circumstances. It wasn't until the 1990s that a historian named Roger Ickert started systematically collecting these references and realized they were describing standard sleep patterns, not exceptions. Ickert found over 500 references to segmented sleep in literature, legal documents, medical texts, diaries, and letters spanning from ancient times through the 19th century. The pattern was consistent across cultures and time periods. Humans slept in 2 segments, with wakefulness between them, and this was so normal that most writers barely bothered to explain it. So what did people do during the watching? That hour or two of calm wakefulness in the middle of the night. The activities varied by culture, class, and individual preference, but certain patterns emerge from the historical record. And these activities reveal a whole aspect of human life that we've completely lost in our modern continuous sleep pattern. The most common activity was prayer and meditation. In Christian Europe, the watching period was considered spiritually significant, a quiet time when the world was asleep and you could communicate with God more directly. Many people kept prayer books beside their bed specifically for this purpose. They'd wake during the watching, light a candle, or lie in darkness and pray. These weren't formal church prayers necessarily, though those existed too. Often they were personal prayers, reflections on the day past and the day to come, gratitude, requests, conversations with the divine. The darkness and quietness created an atmosphere that felt sacred, separate from ordinary time. Many people reported feeling closer to God during the watching than during daylight prayers. There were specific prayers written for this time. The night office, or matins, were prayers meant to be said in the deep night. Monks and nuns would rise for formal midnight prayers, but ordinary people had their own nighttime devotions. Prayer books from medieval and early modern periods include sections specifically labeled for the watching or
The
between
watching
sleeps.
was also prime time for intimacy between couples. After first sleep, both partners were rested, relaxed, and had privacy in the darkness. Medieval medical authorities actually recommended this timing for conception, believing that the restedness from first sleep made for healthier offspring. Whether that's medically accurate is debatable, but it shows how accepted and normalized this pattern was. Historical sources also mention conversation during the watching. Couples would lie in bed talking, discussing things they hadn't had time for during the busy day. Parents and children sharing beds might chat quietly. In homes where multiple family members slept in one room, the watching could become a time for family conversation, storytelling, sharing worries or plans. Some people use the watching for practical activities. They'd get up, stoke the fire, check on animals, make sure everything was secure. In winter, this fire tending was important, keeping the house warm enough to sleep comfortably during second sleep. In farming communities, people might check on pregnant animals or sick livestock during the watching. Surprisingly, the watching was also a social time. People would visit neighbors during this period, especially in rural communities where houses were close together. You'd wake from first sleep, decide you wanted company, and walk to a neighbor's house. They'd probably be awake too, between their sleeps.
You'd sit together for an hour, talking quietly by firelight or moonlight, then both return home for second sleep. These midnight visits weren't emergencies or unusual events. They were normal social calls. Medieval legal documents mention disputes that started during nighttime visits after first sleep. Church authorities sometimes complained about these visits, worried they facilitated illicit affairs or mischief, which suggests they were common enough to be a concern. Some people used the watching for creative or intellectual work. The quiet darkness, the rested state from first sleep, the lack of distractions. This combination made the watching ideal for thinking, writing, creating. Many writers and scholars reported doing their best work during these hours. The mind was clear but relaxed, in a state between waking and sleeping that facilitated certain types of thinking. Dreams from first sleep were often vivid and memorable, and the watching period allowed people to reflect on these dreams while they were still fresh. Dream interpretation was taken seriously in most historical periods, and the watching provided natural time for this reflection. You'd wake from a dream, lie in the darkness thinking about its meaning, perhaps discussing it with your bed partner, before drifting into second sleep. Some people simply lay quietly during the watching, not praying or thinking about anything in particular, just existing in a state of calm awareness. Modern sleep researchers have studied this state and found it has its own benefits. It's deeply restful, even though you're not sleeping, a kind of meditation that happens naturally. Your body is still, your breathing is slow, your mind is peaceful but aware. This state between sleeps seems to be when humans are naturally most reflective and philosophical. Without the distractions of daylight, without tasks demanding attention, the mind naturally turns inward. Many people reported having profound realizations during the watching, solving problems that had puzzled them during the day, understanding things about themselves or their lives that daylight thinking couldn't reveal. The darkness itself was different in pre-industrial times. True darkness, the kind most modern people never experience. No street lights, no neighbors' lights, no electronic glow, just darkness, complete and profound. During the watching, people existed in this darkness, perhaps with a small fire or candle, but often with no light at all. The darkness wasn't frightening when you were in your own bed, in your own home. It was peaceful, enveloping, natural. In this darkness, your other senses became more acute. You'd hear things you wouldn't notice during the day: the wind, the fire settling, animals moving outside, other people breathing. Your sense of touch was heightened, aware of blankets, the person next to you, the air temperature. Time felt different in this darkness, slower, more fluid, less pressing. The watching also served practical security purposes. With someone naturally awake in most households during the midnight hours, communities had organic night watch. If something went wrong, fire, intruders, animals, someone was likely to be awake to notice. This wasn't organized or formal, but it worked. The natural rhythm of human sleep provided natural surveillance. Children in historical periods grew up with segmented sleep as normal. They'd go to bed with their parents or siblings, sleep their first sleep, then wake during the watching. Parents might nurse infants during this time, or tell older children stories, or just lie together quietly. Children learned that nighttime wakefulness was normal, nothing to fear or fight. They developed healthy relationships with their own sleep patterns.
This is such a contrast to modern children's sleep training, where we insist they sleep through the night in one block from infancy. We treat nighttime awaking as a problem to solve, a failure of sleep training. But historically, children naturally woke between sleeps just like adults, and this was fine. It was expected. The modern insistence on continuous sleep may be fighting against natural human rhythms. The transition from first to second sleep was gradual and natural. You wouldn't jerk awake suddenly. You'd slowly surface from sleep, becoming aware of yourself, your surroundings, transitioning gently into wakefulness. This gentle waking is very different from alarm clocks or being startled awake. It allowed natural wake-up processes, the body and mind coming online gradually. Similarly, the transition from watching to second sleep was natural. You didn't force yourself back to sleep or worry about falling asleep. When your body was ready, usually after an hour or two, you'd feel sleepiness returning, your thoughts would become less focused, your body would relax further, and you'd naturally drift into second sleep. No effort required, no anxiety about whether you'd be able to fall back asleep. This natural rhythm meant people rarely experienced the anxiety that modern people associate with nighttime waking. If you woke at 2 a.m. in medieval times, you wouldn't panic or start worrying about how tired you'd be tomorrow. You'd know this was normal, that you'd naturally fall back asleep when your body was ready, and that you'd get enough total sleep. The watching was just part of the night's structure, not a problem. The seasonal variation in segmented sleep is also interesting. In winter, when nights were long and darkness fell early, the watching period might be longer, sometimes up to 3 hours. People would go to bed earlier because there wasn't much to do in the dark, sleep their first sleep, have an extended watching period, then second sleep, and still wake up at dawn with plenty of total sleep. In summer, when nights were shorter and daylight lasted later, the pattern compressed. First sleep might only be 3 hours, watching might be shorter, second sleep briefer. The total sleep time adjusted naturally to the season, but the two-part pattern remained. This flexibility shows how natural and adaptive segmented sleep was.
Different social classes experienced the watching differently. Wealthy people might light multiple candles during the watching, have servants available if needed, engage in reading or writing if literate. Poor people would likely stay in bed, conserve warmth and resources, use the watching for prayer or conversation, but not activities requiring light or energy. But the basic pattern was the same across all social levels. Everyone from kings to peasants slept in 2 segments. Wealth might change what you did during the watching, but it didn't change the fundamental rhythm. This was one aspect of life where biological reality created equality. Everyone's body following the same basic pattern regardless of social status. The watching also had cultural variations. In some Mediterranean cultures, people might eat light snacks during this time. In Northern European cultures, where winter nights were extremely long, the watching might involve more activity to stay warm. In warmer climates, people might step outside during the watching to cool off before second sleep. Religious communities had formal structures for the watching. Monasteries and convents had bells that rang for midnight prayers, calling everyone to chapel for night office. These bells served the broader community too, marking the watching period for people who might not be keeping close track of time in the darkness. The bells acknowledged and reinforced the natural sleep pattern. Monks and nuns would rise from first sleep, attend midnight prayers that might last an hour, then return to bed for second sleep. This religious practice was built around natural human sleep rhythms, not fighting them. The founding rules of monastic orders, written centuries ago, assume segmented sleep and structure religious life around it. Even animals that lived closely with humans seemed to follow similar patterns. Dogs would settle down when the household went to first sleep, then might be active during the watching, investigating the house or interacting with humans who were awake, before settling again for second sleep. Cats, already naturally crepuscular, fit right into this pattern. The household animals adapted to human rhythms, or perhaps humans adapted to animal rhythms. It's hard to say which came first.
So, when did this pattern change? When did humans shift from natural segmented sleep to our modern expectation of continuous sleep?
The transition happened gradually over about 200 years, roughly from 1650 to 1850, and it was driven by several interconnected changes in how people lived. The most obvious factor was artificial lighting. As candles became cheaper and more available, as oil lamps improved, and eventually as gas lighting and then electric lighting arrived, darkness became optional. People could stay up later doing activities that required light. The natural cue to go to bed, darkness, became less compelling. Coffee houses emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries, creating social spaces that stayed open into evening, offering caffeinated beverages that made it easier to stay awake. The wealthy began having evening entertainments, dinners, parties, concerts that pushed bedtime later. Going to bed at 8 p.m. became increasingly seen as rustic or old-fashioned. Industrialization was the bigger driver. Factories needed workers present for entire shifts, continuous blocks of time. You couldn't have workers leaving for an hour in the middle of the night during the watching. Factory schedules demanded continuous waking time and continuous sleeping time, dividing the day cleanly into work and rest with no messy overlap. Clocks and watches became more common and more accurate. Time became more precisely measured and controlled. You didn't go to bed when darkness falls anymore. You went to bed at a specific hour. You didn't wake up between sleeps. You woke up at 7 a.m. to be at work by 8. Sleep became scheduled, regimented, another thing to be managed efficiently.
The ideology around sleep changed, too. Doctors and moral authorities began promoting continuous sleep as more healthy and virtuous. Nighttime wakefulness started being seen as inefficient, potentially sinful. What mischief might people get up to wandering around at midnight? Or medically problematic. The watching period, which had been normal for centuries, started being described as interrupted sleep, with interrupted having negative connotations. By the late 19th century, medical literature was describing the ideal sleep as one continuous block, and any nighttime waking as insomnia that needed treatment. The doctors who wrote these texts didn't know about historical segmented sleep. They assumed continuous sleep had always been normal and that their patients who woke in the middle of the night had disorders. This medical misconception got built into our entire culture's understanding of sleep. We inherited the late 19th century idea that you should sleep straight through, that nighttime waking is a problem, that good sleep means unconsciousness from bedtime to wake up. We've based sleep medicine, sleep advice, sleeping pill development, all on this assumption that continuous sleep is normal. But it's not. Or rather, it's only normal for the last 150 years or so. For the thousands of years before that, humans slept differently. The watching wasn't insomnia, it was part of healthy sleep. Our bodies still remember this pattern, still try to follow it, which is why so many people wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. and lie there peacefully for a while before falling back asleep. Modern sleep research has started recognizing this. Studies of people living without artificial light, whether hunter-gatherer societies or experimental groups, show they naturally fall into segmented sleep patterns. When you remove electric lights and let people sleep according to natural darkness, they start waking between sleeps after a few weeks. One famous experiment involved people living in medieval conditions for a month, going to bed when it got dark, having only firelight or candles. Initially, they struggled with the early bedtimes and the long nights, but after about 2 weeks, their bodies adjusted. They started naturally waking between sleeps, experiencing that peaceful watching period, then drifting back to second sleep. When the experiment ended and they returned to modern life, many reported missing that quiet nighttime period.
Sleep laboratories have also studied what happens when people wake naturally in the middle of the night. The brain state during the watching period is interesting. It's not the same as being awake during the day. It's a particular kind of consciousness, relaxed, reflective, almost meditative. Some researchers think this state has unique benefits for mental health
and cognitive processing that we're missing by trying to sleep continuously. The watching period appears to be when the brain does certain types of emotional processing and memory consolidation. The combination of having slept already, so you're rested, but not being fully alert because it's dark and you're still in sleep mode, creates ideal conditions for processing emotional experiences and integrating memories. We might be losing something important by eliminating this period. Modern people who embrace their nighttime waking, who stop fighting it and start treating it like the watching, often report benefits. They find that 2 a.m. quiet time becomes valuable for reflection, creativity, spiritual practice. They stop being anxious about being awake and start appreciating the peaceful hour before naturally drifting back to sleep. They're essentially rediscovering what their ancestors knew. Nighttime wakefulness can be pleasant and valuable. Of course, modern life makes this challenging. If you have to be at work at a specific time, you can't necessarily afford to spend an hour awake in the middle of the night. If you're surrounded by artificial light and electronic devices, maintaining natural darkness is difficult. The structures of industrial society fight against segmented sleep, even if your body wants to follow that pattern.
But understanding the history helps. When you wake up at 2 a.m., instead of thinking, "Oh no, I have insomnia, something's wrong with me," you can think, "Oh, it's the watching, the period between my sleeps, the time my ancestors used for prayer and reflection." That mental shift alone, from problem to normalcy, can reduce anxiety and help you naturally return to sleep when your body is ready. Some sleep experts now recommend that people who wake during the night should not force themselves back to sleep immediately. Instead, they should accept the waking, maybe get up and do something quiet in dim light, and trust that sleep will return naturally. This advice essentially recreates the watching, acknowledging that nighttime wakefulness is natural and shouldn't be fought. The historical pattern also suggests that our modern sleep problems might partly result from fighting our biology. We try to force continuous sleep when our bodies want segmented sleep. We use sleeping pills and sleep aids to maintain unconsciousness through the natural waking period. We create anxiety about nighttime waking that makes sleep problems worse. Maybe we'd sleep better if we worked with our natural patterns instead of against them. There's also something poignant about what we've lost. That quiet hour between sleeps was a time outside normal time, a liminal space that belonged neither to day nor night. It was when people connected with themselves, with their partners, with the divine in ways that busy daylight didn't allow. The watching was built-in reflection time, meditation time, relationship time. Modern life gives us very few spaces like that. We're busy from wake up to bedtime, then we try to sleep straight through, then we're busy again. We've eliminated the natural pause, the breathing space in the middle of the night when humans historically did their deepest thinking and feeling. Maybe some of modern culture's anxiety and disconnection relates to losing this quiet time. Couples in particular might benefit from understanding the watching. Historically, this was prime time for intimate conversation and connection. Modern couples, with their continuous sleep patterns and busy lives, might go days without extended quiet time together. The watching provided that naturally. You'd both be awake, in bed, in darkness, with nothing else demanding attention. It was relationship time that happened automatically every night.
Parents and children also lost something. The watching was when parents might comfort frightened children, tell stories, provide reassurance. Instead of treating nighttime waking as a problem, it was opportunity for connection. Modern parents, exhausted and trying to maintain their own continuous sleep, often see children's nighttime waking as disruption, rather than natural behavior that could be used for bonding. The spiritual dimension of the watching is also significant. Many religious traditions have midnight prayers or practices, and these likely originated when the watching was universal. That quiet, dark, peaceful hour naturally lends itself to spiritual reflection. Modern people who maintain spiritual practices often struggle to find time. Their ancestors had time built in to their sleep pattern. Creative people have long known that the middle of the night has special qualities for creative work. Many writers, artists, composers report their best ideas coming at night. They're probably accessing that watching consciousness, that state between sleeping and waking that's particularly good for certain types of thinking. Our ancestors naturally spent time in this state every night. The loss of the watching also affected community bonds. Those nighttime visits between neighbors, that social time in the middle of the night, created connections that supplemented daytime interaction. Communities were woven together partly through these midnight encounters. Modern neighbors might live next to each other for years without really connecting, partly because we never see each other during the old nighttime social hours.
There's debate among sleep researchers about whether we should try to return to segmented sleep. Some argue that it's more natural and healthy, that we should restructure our schedules to allow for it. Others point out that industrial society makes this impractical, that we can't return to pre-industrial sleep patterns while maintaining modern lifestyles. But perhaps there's a middle path. Not everyone needs to adopt strict segmented sleep, but everyone can benefit from understanding it. When you do wake at night, you can recognize it as natural rather than pathological. You can use that time peacefully instead of anxiously. You can appreciate the quiet moment instead of fighting it. Some people are experimenting with modified segmented sleep in modern contexts. They might not sleep in 2 distinct periods every night, but they allow themselves to sleep earlier and accept natural waking, using that time for meditation, journaling, or quiet thought before returning to sleep. They're adapting the historical pattern to modern circumstances. Understanding segmented sleep also helps explain certain sleep phenomena that otherwise seem mysterious. That feeling of being most creative or reflective at 3 a.m., that's your brain in watching mode. The tendency to wake at the same time every night, that might be your first sleep naturally ending. The peaceful feeling sometimes accompanying nighttime waking, that's what the watching felt like when it was normal and accepted.
The historical record also shows us that humans are more adaptable regarding sleep than we might think. We've completely changed our sleep pattern in just 150 years, shifting from segmented to continuous sleep across entire populations. This suggests that sleep patterns aren't rigidly fixed, but respond to environmental and cultural cues. We can potentially change them again if we choose to. Some researchers study hunter-gatherer groups that still exist, trying to understand natural human sleep patterns. Interestingly, these groups show variation. Some practice clearly segmented sleep, others less so, but almost all show flexible sleep patterns that respond to seasons, social needs, and individual variation. The strict continuous sleep schedule might be the aberration, not the historical patterns. The watching also reminds us that darkness itself has value. We've eliminated darkness from modern life as much as possible, lighting everything constantly. But our ancestors spent large portions of their lives in darkness, and that darkness shaped their experiences, their thoughts, their spiritual lives. The watching happened in darkness, and the darkness itself was part of what made it special. True darkness, the kind most modern people never experience, has psychological effects we're only beginning to understand. It forces you inward, makes you more aware of your own thoughts and feelings. It removes visual distractions and demands different kinds of attention. The watching happened in this darkness, and the darkness itself was part of the experience, not something to be eliminated, but something to be inhabited. Modern light pollution means most people never experience natural darkness. Even at night, there's ambient light from street lights, neighbors, devices. This constant light might be contributing to sleep problems, not just by disrupting circadian rhythms, but by eliminating the psychological experience of darkness that naturally accompanies deep rest and the watching period. Some people are experimenting with recreating historical darkness conditions, using blackout curtains, eliminating electronic lights, experiencing what nighttime used to be like. Many report sleeping better and naturally falling into segmented patterns when they remove artificial light completely. The darkness itself seems to trigger old biological patterns that modern lighting suppresses. The watching also had practical benefits we've lost. That midnight period when someone in most households was naturally awake provided natural fire watch. Before modern fire safety, house fires were a constant danger. Having someone awake and alert during the night hours meant fires could be caught early. This wasn't organized, it just happened naturally because of human sleep patterns. Security was another benefit. With people naturally awake during midnight hours, communities had organic vigilance. If something unusual happened, animals, intruders, weather events, someone was likely awake to notice. The modern idea of a night watchman might have originated because we needed to artificially recreate the natural watchfulness that segmented sleep provided automatically.
Parents with young children also benefited. Babies and young children wake frequently at night, and historically, this coincided with adults' natural waking period. A parent awake during the watching could attend to a child without it being a major disruption because they were already awake. Modern parents, trying to maintain continuous sleep, experience infant night waking as much more disruptive. The watching period was also when many people dealt with bodily needs that we now consider interruptions to sleep. People would use chamber pots, drink water, adjust bedding, all during this naturally wakeful period. These weren't interruptions because the wakefulness was already there. Modern people who wake to use the bathroom often stress about falling back asleep, creating anxiety around what should be a natural part of the night. Historical sleep positions might have also supported segmented sleep. Before modern soft mattresses, people slept on firmer surfaces that made it natural to shift position regularly. This shifting might have naturally led to the between-sleep waking. Modern, very soft mattresses might actually discourage the natural positional changes that trigger the watching period. Sleeping in groups, which was common historically, probably also affected the pattern. When multiple people shared sleeping spaces, their sleep cycles would influence each other. One person waking during the watching might naturally wake others through small sounds or movements. This created synchronized household waking periods that became social and useful times. The temperature cycles of pre-modern homes also aligned with segmented sleep. Fires would be banked before first sleep, burned down during those hours, and need stoking during the watching period to maintain warmth for second sleep. The cooling temperature might naturally wake people, and getting up to tend the fire became part of the watching routine. Modern temperature-controlled homes eliminate this natural cycle and the wake-up trigger it provided.
Food digestion patterns might have played a role too. With last meals eaten at dusk and no late-night snacking, the digestive system would have completed most of its work by first sleep, and the watching period might have been when people naturally felt some hunger, prompting wakefulness. Some historical sources mention light snacks during the watching, suggesting this was a recognized bodily need. The seasonal variations in segmented sleep show how responsive the pattern was to environmental conditions. In winter, with very long nights,
people might sleep 12 or more hours total with extended watching periods. This seasonal flexibility kept humans aligned with natural cycles in ways modern fixed schedules don't allow. We sleep the same hours year-round now, regardless of season. Some researchers suggest that modern seasonal affective disorder might partly relate to forcing consistent sleep schedules across seasons. Historically, winter was a time of more sleep, more indoor time, more rest. Modern society demands the same productivity and wakefulness year-round, fighting against natural tendencies to sleep more in winter darkness. The watching period was also when dreams from first sleep would be remembered and considered. First sleep dreams are often the most vivid, incorporating the day's events and concerns. Waking naturally after these dreams, rather than being jolted awake by an alarm, allowed for dream recall and reflection. Many historical sources discuss dreams and their interpretation, suggesting this dream processing was a normal part of nightly
sleep
experience.
Research shows that the type of sleep in first and second sleep periods differs. First sleep is usually dominated by deep, slow wave sleep, the physically restorative phase. Second sleep has more REM sleep, the dreaming phase. This natural division might serve different sleep functions more effectively than trying to get all sleep types in one continuous block. The watching period between these sleep types might allow the brain to process the information from first sleep before moving into the different sleep type of second sleep. It's like a natural reset, a pause that helps the brain transition between sleep phases. Continuous sleep forces this transition without the pause, which might be less efficient. Some people with depression report that their symptoms are worse in the morning, better as the day progresses. Historically, with segmented sleep, people would wake during the watching, process emotions and thoughts in that peaceful state, then have second sleep to further integrate these processes before morning. Modern continuous sleep might not provide the same emotional processing opportunity, potentially contributing to morning mood problems. The watching period was also culturally creative time. Many folk songs, stories, and traditions reference the nighttime hours between sleeps. Ghost stories were often told during the watching, when the dark and quiet made them more atmospheric. Lullabies and prayers written for this period form part of cultural heritage. We've lost not just a sleep pattern, but a whole category of
Interestingly,
cultural production
some modern shift
associated
workers and
with it.
people with non-standard schedules sometimes naturally fall into segmented sleep patterns without realizing that's what they're doing. They sleep, wake for a few hours, then sleep again, and often feel guilty about this irregular pattern. But they're actually following a very old, very natural pattern that's only irregular by modern industrial standards. The writing of historical figures sometimes references their nighttime thoughts and activities during what was clearly the watching period. Leonardo da Vinci kept notebooks by his bed for nighttime ideas. Benjamin Franklin wrote about the productive thinking he did between sleeps. Thomas Edison, ironically a major contributor to eliminating natural darkness, reportedly napped in segmented patterns and used the between-sleep time for creative thinking. Modern creative people who work at night often describe a particular quality of nighttime thinking that differs from daytime. This might be them accessing that watching period consciousness, that state between sleeping and waking that's particularly good for certain types of mental work. Our ancestors naturally spent an hour or two in this state every night. The advice often given for insomnia, don't lie in bed awake, get up and do something quiet until you feel sleepy again, essentially recreates the watching. The difference is that modern people do this with anxiety, seeing it as managing a problem, while historically, people did it peacefully, seeing it as normal nighttime activity. The behavior is the same, but the mental framing, completely changes the
Understanding
experience.
segmented sleep might help with modern sleep anxiety. Many people lie awake at 2 a.m. worrying that they can't sleep, calculating how many hours they'll get if they fall asleep right now, getting increasingly stressed. If they knew this waking was natural, that they'd naturally fall back asleep when ready, the anxiety would decrease, and ironically, they'd probably fall back asleep more easily. The watching period also provided natural time for problem solving. You'd go to sleep with a problem, wake during the watching with your mind naturally turning it over, often finding solutions or new perspectives, then return to sleep. The phrase "sleep on it" might originally have meant sleeping through first sleep, considering something during the watching, then making a decision after second sleep. This natural problem-solving time might be another thing we've lost. Modern people often feel they never have time to just think, to let their minds wander over problems without pressure. The watching provided that automatically. In darkness, in bed, with no demands or distractions, your mind naturally worked through whatever needed working through. Some meditation and mindfulness practices try to recreate the state of consciousness that comes naturally during the watching. That relaxed, aware, reflective state that's not quite sleeping but not fully awake. Historically, people experience the state naturally every night, just by following their body's rhythms. Modern people have to deliberately practice to access it. The watching period might also have been important for physical health in ways we don't fully understand. That pause between sleep periods, when you'd naturally stretch, shift position, possibly get up briefly, might have helped with circulation and muscle relaxation. Modern continuous sleep, especially in very soft beds that discourage movement, might not provide the same physical benefits.
Historical sources sometimes mention waking with aches or stiffness, getting up during the watching to walk around or stretch, then returning to second sleep feeling better. This natural physical maintenance time might have prevented some problems that modern people treat with specialized mattresses or physical therapy. The social aspects of the watching are perhaps what we've lost most completely. Modern life is atomized, with individuals or nuclear families isolated in separate homes, sleeping on separate schedules. Historical communities had this natural synchronization point where many people were awake simultaneously in the deep night, creating opportunities for connection. Even within households, the watching provided connection time that modern life rarely offers. Everyone busy during the day, tired at night, trying to sleep straight through. When do people really connect? The watching gave an hour or two of quiet, dark, peaceful time when the only thing to do was be together and talk. Modern families sometimes go days without that kind of unstructured connection time. Children particularly might benefit from understanding segmented sleep. Modern parents often stress when children wake at night, seeing it as a sleep problem. But children naturally wake between sleeps, just like adults. If parents recognize this as normal and use the time for calm connection rather than anxious sleep training, both parents and children might sleep better
The watching
overall.
period was also when people dealt with fears and anxieties that might have emerged during first sleep dreams. You'd wake from a nightmare, lie in darkness processing it, perhaps discussing it with a bed partner, finding comfort and perspective, then returning to second sleep calmed. Modern people often wake from nightmares and lie anxious in darkness, with no cultural framework for using that waking time productively. Some therapists now suggest that clients who wake at night should use that time for gentle reflection rather than trying to force sleep.
This recreates the watching, acknowledging that nighttime wakefulness has value and shouldn't be fought. Clients who embrace this often report better sleep and better emotional processing. The watching reminds us that our modern lives have disconnected us from natural rhythms in many ways. Not just sleep patterns, but seasonal cycles, light-dark cycles, social patterns that evolved over thousands of years. We've optimized for industrial productivity, but lost much of what made humans feel connected to themselves, each other, and natural cycles. This doesn't mean we should all return to medieval life, but understanding what we've lost helps us make conscious choices about what to reclaim. Maybe you can't practice full segmented sleep with modern work schedules, but you can stop being anxious about nighttime waking. Maybe you can't eliminate all artificial light, but you can create darker sleeping environments. Maybe you can't recreate medieval community life, but you can use nighttime waking for reflection and connection. The beauty of rediscovering segmented sleep is that it's empowering. Instead of feeling broken when you wake at 2 a.m., you can recognize that your body is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Instead of lying anxious about falling back asleep, you can accept the watching period, use it peacefully, and trust that sleep will return. This mental shift alone often resolves what people think is insomnia.
So tonight, if you wake in the deep hours between first and second sleep, maybe you'll remember your ancestors. Remember them waking at the same time, not worried or anxious, just peacefully awake in the watching. Maybe you'll lie there thinking about your day, your life, your dreams. Maybe you'll pray or meditate. Maybe you'll talk quietly with whoever shares your bed. Maybe you'll just exist peacefully in the darkness, trusting that your body knows what it's doing. And when you feel sleepiness returning, as it naturally will, you'll drift back into second sleep, knowing that you've experienced something humans have experienced for thousands of years. That quiet hour between sleeps, the watching, the time when the world is asleep and you're peacefully awake, connected to an ancient pattern that your body remembers, even if your culture has forgotten. That's why our ancestors woke up at 2 a.m. Not because something was wrong, but because something was right. Because that's how humans naturally sleep. Because the watching period served important purposes: physical, psychological, social, spiritual. Because sleep isn't supposed to be one unconscious block, but a rhythm with waking built in, a pattern that honors how our minds and bodies actually work. So rest easy tonight, and if you wake before dawn, don't fight it. Welcome the watching. Your ancestors are with you in that quiet moment. All the humans who've ever woken peacefully between sleeps, known they'd sleep again, used that time for whatever their souls needed. You're not alone in the darkness. You're participating in a pattern as old as humanity itself. Good night, and may your first sleep be deep, your watching peaceful, and your second sleep carry you gently to morning.
So, gather round close. This one's about the hour that terrified medieval Europe, the time when demons walked, when witches gathered, when the boundary between worlds grew thin. They called it the witching hour, and everyone knew it happened between midnight and 3 in the morning. But here's what they didn't know. The real secret wasn't supernatural, it was biological. And the fear of this hour would lead to accusations, burnings, and a paranoia that gripped entire communities. It's 1350 in a small village in Lincolnshire, England. The Black Death has passed through like God's own scythe, taking 2/3 of the village. The survivors are traumatized, suspicious, desperately seeking explanations for the horror they've endured.
And in this atmosphere of fear and grief, the night has become a dangerous time, especially for those who are awake when others sleep. Agnes is a widow of 42 years, which makes her old by medieval standards. Her husband died in the plague, along with one of her 3 children. She survived, and more than that, she helped others survive. She knows herbs, knows remedies passed down from her mother and grandmother. She can set broken bones, deliver babies, brew tonics that ease pain and reduce fever. In the village, she's essential, but she's also becoming dangerous in ways she doesn't yet understand. Agnes follows the old sleep pattern, the one everyone followed before anyone thought to question it. She goes to bed shortly after sunset, around 8 in the evening. Her cottage is small, just one room with a hearth, a bed of straw and wool, a table, a few essential tools. She banks the fire, says her evening prayers, and drifts into first sleep. 4 hours later, around midnight or just after, she wakes. Not startled, not troubled, just naturally surfacing from sleep into calm wakefulness. This is the watching, the time between first and second sleep. For Agnes, this is when she does her real work, the work that requires quiet and concentration, the work that saves lives. She rises from her bed, wraps a heavy cloak around her shoulders against the autumn chill, and stirs the fire back to life. The embers glow red, catching on new kindling, slowly building to flames that push back the darkness. She lights 2 tallow candles, their smell familiar and comforting, their light casting dancing shadows on the walls. On her table are the tools of her trade, a mortar and pestle, clay jars containing dried herbs, roots hanging from the ceiling rafters, and a small cauldron for brewing, and most precious of all, a manuscript. It's not hers, strictly speaking. The parish priest loaned it to her months ago before he died in the plague. It's a herbal, a medical text written in Latin, describing plants and their uses. Agnes can't read Latin well, but she's been working through it slowly, matching the descriptions to plants she knows, learning new preparations. Tonight, like most nights during the watching, she works. She's preparing a tonic for old Thomas, who has a persistent cough that won't clear. She grinds dried elderflower with a bit of honey, adds hot water, lets it steep. The smell fills her cottage, sweet and medicinal. While it steeps, she consults the manuscript, trying to decipher a passage about a plant she thinks might be yarrow. The village is completely silent outside. Everyone else is in first sleep, the deep rest that comes in those first hours after darkness. Agnes is alone in her wakefulness, and she likes it this way. The watching is her time, when she can think clearly, work without interruption, study the knowledge that might save the next person who falls ill. But Agnes doesn't know that her midnight activities are being watched. She doesn't know that her neighbor, Margaret, a bitter woman who lost her entire family to plague and blames everyone for it, has been noticing the light in Agnes's window during the deep night. She doesn't know that Margaret has been talking to others, spreading whispers, asking pointed questions.
Why is Agnes awake when good Christians sleep? What is she doing in there with her fires and her herbs? Who is she talking to in the darkness? These questions are dangerous in 1350. The plague has shaken everyone's faith, made people desperate for explanations, and the old explanations, the supernatural ones, are resurging. Devils,
demons, witches who consort with Satan during the night hours. The church teaches that the hours between midnight and 3 are when evil is strongest, when demons walk the earth, when the boundary between the living world and hell grows thin. This teaching has practical origins, rooted in that same biphasic sleep pattern Agnes follows. Many people naturally wake around midnight or 1 in the morning. In the darkness, with limited light, with their minds in that strange state between sleeping and full waking, people experience things. Shadows seem to move, sounds are amplified, the imagination runs wild. This is when people report seeing demons, hearing voices, feeling presences in the room. What they're actually experiencing is the watching, that natural waking period combined with the psychological effects of darkness and isolation. But in medieval Europe, these experiences are interpreted through a religious lens. If you wake at midnight and feel frightened, hear strange sounds, see shadows moving, the explanation is obvious. Demons are active, evil is abroad, this is the witching hour. And if you're awake during the witching hour, by choice, working rather than sleeping, what does that suggest? To suspicious neighbors, to a community traumatized by plague and desperate to assign blame, it suggests you're not fully human. You're in league with the darkness. You're a witch. Agnes doesn't think about any of this as she works through the night. She finishes Thomas's tonic, sets it aside to cool. She returns to her manuscript, squinting in the candlelight at the cramped Latin text. She's trying to understand a passage about a plant called angelica, which the text claims can ward off poison and pestilence. If she could identify this plant, grow it, or find it growing wild, it might help if plague returns. Outside, in the darkness, Margaret is creeping close to Agnes's cottage. She's not alone. She's brought William, a farmer who lost his wife and son to plague, and John, the village's new priest, young and zealous and eager to prove his authority. They gather in the shadows just beyond the glow of Agnes's window, watching, listening. They can see Agnes through the shutters, moving around her cottage, working at her table. They can see the manuscript she's reading, though they can't see what it says. They can see the cauldron, the herbs, the focused concentration on her face. And in the darkness, with their own minds influenced by fear and suspicion, what they see confirms their worst fears. "She's casting spells," Margaret whispers, her voice sharp with vindication. "Look at her, brewing potions in the devil's hour, reading from that cursed book. She's communing with demons. I told you." Father John is young enough to believe every word of his training, to see evil where there might be innocence. He watches Agnes work and sees not a healer preparing medicine, but a witch performing rituals. The manuscript looks like a grimoire. The herbs look like spell components. The midnight hour itself is damning evidence. "We must confront her," he says quietly. "If she's trafficking with darkness, the village is in mortal danger. More souls could be lost." But William, older and more cautious, holds up a hand. "Wait. Watch. We need more evidence. The church requires witnesses, proof. Let's observe her for several nights, document what we see, then we bring charges that will stand." So they watch. Night after night, during the watching period when most of the village sleeps, these three stand in the darkness outside of Agnes's cottage, observing her midnight activities. They see her working with herbs and fire. They see her consulting the manuscript. They see her occasionally stepping outside to gather plants by moonlight, moving through her garden with practiced ease. What they don't understand, What they can't understand, because they're viewing it through a lens of suspicion and superstition, is that Agnes is simply following the natural human sleep pattern. She's awake during the watching because everyone's body wants to be awake then. She's using this time productively because she's a healer with work to do. The manuscript is a medical text, not a grimoire. The herbs are medicine, not spell components. But in 1350, with the plague's trauma still fresh, with the church teaching that midnight is when evil walks, with the entire concept of the witching hour embedded in everyone's understanding of reality, the natural explanation doesn't occur to them. They see what they expect to see: a witch working dark magic in the hours when demons are strongest. Agnes remains oblivious to the surveillance. She's focused on her work, on learning, on preparing remedies that might help when the next illness comes. She's made progress with the manuscript, has identified several new plants, and has successfully treated 3 villagers with preparations based on what she's learned. One night, during her watching period, Agnes has a breakthrough. She's been puzzling over a passage describing symptoms of a particular ailment, and suddenly she understands. The text is describing the early stages of plague, and it's suggesting a preventative treatment using a combination of herbs she has access to: wormwood, rue, garlic, and something else, a plant she thinks might be angelica. She works quickly, excitement overcoming the usual calm of the watching. She prepares a small batch of the preventative tonic, following the manuscript's instructions as closely as she can. If this works, if it really can prevent plague or reduce its severity, she could save lives when the sickness inevitably returns. She's so focused on her work that she doesn't notice the watchers outside are particularly attentive tonight. Her enthusiasm, her rapid movements, the way she consults the manuscript repeatedly, all this looks to them like a witch engaged in particularly powerful magic. And the timing is significant. It's the night of the new moon, which in their understanding is when dark magic is strongest. She's doing it, Margaret whispers urgently. She's casting the great curse. We must stop her now before she completes the ritual. Father John makes the sign of the cross. We need to act. If she's conjuring demons or laying curses, we have a duty to intervene. William? William is hesitant, but the weeks of watching have worn down his skepticism. He's seen Agnes awake every night when good Christians sleep, working with mysterious substances, reading from forbidden texts. The evidence has accumulated. Yes, he finally says. Yes, we must act. They move toward the door. Agnes hears the footsteps, looks up from her work just as they burst in. 3 figures in the doorway, faces hard with conviction, Father John holding a wooden cross before him like a weapon. In the name of God, cease your devil's work, the priest commands, his young voice cracking slightly with fear and righteousness. Agnes freezes, shocked, not understanding. What? I'm preparing medicine for when plague returns. I found a possible preventative.
Lies. Margaret cuts her off. We've watched you, night after night, working in the witching hour, brewing your potions, reading your cursed book. You're a witch, Agnes. You've been consorting with demons while the village sleeps. No, you don't understand. This is just the watching, the time between first and second sleep. Everyone wakes then. I'm just using the time to... The watching? Father John interrupts. That's the witching hour.
the time when evil is abroad, when good Christians should be in their beds, protected by prayer and faith. Only witches are active then, by choice, doing the devil's work. Agnes feels ice in her stomach. She understands now, understands the danger she's in. The natural sleep pattern that everyone follows but few discuss, the midnight waking that's been normal for her entire life, has been reinterpreted as proof of witchcraft. Her healing work, her studies, her attempts to help the village, all seen through the distorting lens of superstition and fear. "Please," she says, trying to stay calm, "look at what I'm making. It's medicine. The manuscript is an herbal, a medical text. Father Benedict loaned it to me before he died. It's church property, not some forbidden grimoire." But they're not listening. William is gathering up her herbs, her tools. Margaret is examining the manuscript with a mixture of fear and triumph. Father John is backing away from the cauldron as if it might explode. "You'll come before the village council at first light," the priest announces. "We'll hear testimony, examine the evidence. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. But I believe we'll find that you've been practicing witchcraft, and the punishment for that is clear in God's law." They leave her under guard in her own cottage, William standing at the door with a stout stick, making sure she doesn't flee or complete her curses. Agnes sits at her table, staring at her hands, trying to think. She's heard what happens to accused witches. The trials of perfunctory, the evidence is whatever the accusers claim, and the punishment is burning. She thinks about her remaining children, about the patients she's helped, about the knowledge she's gained from the manuscript. She thinks about the irony. She's been working to save the village from the next plague, and they're about to kill her for it. As she sits in the darkness, unable to return to second sleep, unable to do anything but wait for dawn and judgment, Agnes has time to understand what's happening. The watching, that natural biological rhythm that humans have followed for millennia, has been demonized. The hours when people naturally wake have been declared evil, and anyone who uses those hours productively becomes suspect. The church has taken a biological reality and turned it into a spiritual danger. And in doing so, they've created the concept of the witching hour, a time so feared that simply being awake during it can be evidence of demonic influence. Dawn comes. The village gathers. Agnes is brought before them, and the accusations are laid out. She was seen working during the witching hour, multiple nights. She was brewing potions. She was reading from a mysterious book. She was gathering herbs by moonlight. She survived the plague when many died. Perhaps she was protected by dark powers. The evidence seems overwhelming to people who want to believe, who need someone to blame for the trauma they've endured. Agnes tries to explain about biphasic sleep, about the watching being natural. But these concepts have no language in 1350. Nobody talks about sleep patterns. They talk about the witching hour, about demons, about God and Satan. Then something unexpected happens. Old Thomas stands up, the man Agnes made the elderflower tonic for. His cough is gone. He's been well for weeks. "He cured me," he says simply. "I was dying, couldn't breathe. She gave me medicine, good medicine, saved my life." Another voice joins in. Mary, who had a difficult childbirth. "She delivered my son when no one else would help. Sat with me all night, kept me alive. Both me and the baby would have died without her." More voices. "Agnes has been helping this village for years. She's delivered babies, set bones, treated fevers and coughs and infections. She survived the plague, yes, but she also nursed others through it, risking her own life daily.
Is this the work of a witch or a healer? Father John is losing control of the proceeding. He tries to argue that devils can heal to deceive, but it sounds weak even to him. The villagers are remembering kindnesses, remembering lives saved. Margaret's accusations suddenly seem mean-spirited, motivated by grief and jealousy rather than genuine evidence. Then Agnes makes her final argument. She asks Father John to examine the manuscript. It's Father Benedict's herbal from the monastery library. Read it. You'll see it's medical knowledge, not magic. And the watching, the time when I work, that's not the witching hour. That's when everyone wakes naturally, between first and second sleep. Ask anyone here, don't they wake in the night? Don't they lie awake for an hour or two before sleeping again? Reluctantly, people nod. They do wake. They do spend time awake in the night. They've just never thought about it, never questioned it, and certainly never called it the watching. But they recognize the truth in Agnes's words. Father John, examining the manuscript, sees it is indeed an herbal, in Latin, clearly of monastic origin. Not a grimoire, not forbidden knowledge, just medicine, recorded by monks who understood plants and their uses. The trial collapses. Not a formal acquittal, nothing so clear-cut. But the energy drains out of the accusation. People drift away, uncomfortable now with how close they came to killing someone who'd only been trying to help them. Margaret, her vindication stolen, slinks off, muttering. William actually apologizes, awkwardly, unable to meet Agnes's eyes. Agnes returns to her cottage, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. She's learned a terrible lesson about how natural behaviors can be misinterpreted, how fear and superstition can turn neighbors into accusers, how the watching period she'd always taken for granted is now seen as dangerous, supernatural, evil. She continues her work, but more carefully now. She keeps her shutters closed during the watching, works by minimal light, makes no noise that might draw attention. The knowledge she's gained from the manuscript, the preventative treatment for plague, she shares quietly with trusted individuals, rather than announcing it publicly. And when plague does return to the region 2 years later, Agnes's preparations help. The village loses fewer people than surrounding communities, and some attribute it to Agnes's remedies, though they're careful not to say so too loudly. She's still useful, still tolerated, but also still suspect, still watched. The concept of the witching hour, born from the natural phenomenon of biphasic sleep, continues to grow and spread across medieval Europe. The hours between midnight and 3 in the morning become increasingly feared, increasingly associated with demonic activity. And anyone who is noticeably, productively active during these hours becomes automatically suspect.
This fear will persist for centuries, feeding into the witch hunts that will sweep Europe in the coming decades and centuries. Thousands of people, mostly women, will be accused of witchcraft based partly on being active during the wrong hours, on working when others sleep, on following patterns that are actually natural but have been redefined as supernatural. The irony is profound. The watching, that peaceful hour between first and second sleep when humans naturally wake and rest quietly, has been transformed into the witching hour, a time of fear and danger. A biological rhythm became a religious threat. Natural wakefulness became evidence of demonic corruption. Agnes lives another 20 years, continuing her healing work, always careful, always aware that she's one accusation away from the pyre. She teaches her daughter some of her knowledge,
but not all, because some knowledge has become too dangerous to pass on. The manuscript eventually goes back to the monastery, and Agnes works from memory and experience. She dies peacefully in her bed during second sleep, just before dawn. Her daughter finds her in the morning, and the village buries her with the proper rites. Father John, older now and perhaps wiser, says a prayer over her grave, acknowledging her service to the community, though he still believes she walked a dangerous line between healing and something darker. The story of Agnes and her near execution becomes one of those tales that villages tell, evolving with each retelling. In some versions, she was innocent. In others, she really was a witch, but a good one. In still others, the truth is ambiguous, left for listeners to decide. But the core truth, the biological reality that started everything, gets lost completely. The watching, that natural period of wakefulness, is forgotten as a concept. It becomes invisible, unspoken, replaced entirely by the witching hour. And this linguistic and conceptual shift has profound consequences. When something natural becomes supernatural in people's minds, when biological rhythms are reinterpreted as demonic influence, you create a climate of fear that can justify terrible things. The witch hunts that will intensify over the next few centuries will be fed by this fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. People will be tortured and killed for following sleep patterns that are actually normal. They'll be accused of communing with demons when they're really just experiencing the watching, that peaceful wakefulness that humans have known for thousands of years. The evidence of witchcraft will include being active during forbidden hours, which really just means being awake when your body naturally wakes you. And all of this, all the fear and violence and death, will be built on a simple misunderstanding of biology, on taking a natural phenomenon and making it evil, on creating the concept of the witching hour from what should have remained the watching.
Now we begin our next story. So this one's about the hour when Rome's greatest decisions were made, when emperors drafted laws that would shape the world, when generals planned campaigns, when philosophers wrote the texts that would survive millennia. Not during the busy daylight hours of the Forum, not during the elaborate evening banquets, but in the deep night, in that peculiar silence between first and second sleep. The Romans had a name for this time, the second vigilia, the second watch. And they understood something we've forgotten, that this hour held a clarity of mind that daylight could never match. It's March of 81 AD, and Rome stands at a crossroads. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, is in his final year of life, though he doesn't know it yet. The Antonine Plague has ravaged the empire for over a decade, killing millions. Barbarian tribes press against the northern borders, sensing weakness. The treasury is strained. The Senate is fractious. And in the heart of this crisis, in a modest apartment in a Roman insula near the Capitoline Hill, a man wakes from his first sleep. Tribune Lucius Valerius Corvus is 38 years old, a military officer who served 20 years on the frontiers before being recalled to Rome to serve as an advisor to the emperor. His body is marked by service, a scar across his left forearm from a dramatic sword, a slight limp from an old leg wound, and eyes that have seen too much death. But his mind is sharp, honed by years of command, and blessed with the clarity that comes during the second vigilia.
Lucius wakes naturally as the second watch begins, around the second hour after midnight by Roman reckoning. His small apartment is dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through the open window. Rome in 180 AD doesn't have street lamps. After sunset, except for torches at major temples and public buildings, the city is dark. This darkness enforces natural sleep patterns, dividing the night into distinct periods. He rises from his bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress covered in wool blankets. The night air is cool, and he wraps his heavy cloak around his shoulders. Moving quietly so as not to disturb his elderly slave, Gaius, who sleeps in the corner, Lucius lights an oil lamp. The flame catches, grows steady, pushing back the darkness with its warm golden glow. This is Lucius's time, the period between sleeps when his mind works best. During first sleep, which began shortly after sunset around 6 hours ago, his body rested, his muscles relaxed, his unconscious mind processed the day's events. Now, in the second vigilia, he's rested but not yet ready for second sleep. His mind is clear, focused, free from the distractions of daylight Rome. He has work to do. The emperor has tasked him with reviewing supply reports from the northern legions, analyzing the logistics of the ongoing campaigns against the Marcomanni and Quadi tribes. These scrolls have been sitting on his table for days, waiting for a time when he could give them proper attention. The second vigilia is that time. Lucius pours water from a clay jug into a bronze cup, adds a bit of honey and some dried herbs for energy and clarity. The Romans don't have coffee or tea, but they have their own mixtures, recipes passed down through generations for maintaining alertness during the night watches. He drinks slowly, feeling his mind sharpen further. His table is covered with scrolls, military reports, Senate records, personal correspondence. He unrolls the first supply scroll, weighted at the corners with small stones. The papyrus is filled with columns of numbers, grain shipments, weapon deliveries, troop movements. He reads by the flickering lamplight, occasionally making notes on a wax tablet with a bronze stylus. The numbers tell a disturbing story. Supply shipments to the northern legions have been inconsistent. Some deliveries are short, others delayed. In war, this means soldiers going hungry, equipment failing, morale dropping. He's seen it before, seen armies crumble, not from enemy action, but from logistical failure.
But there's something odd about the pattern. The shortfalls aren't random. They're concentrated in supplies passing through specific warehouses, handled by specific contractors. And these contractors, Lucius realizes as he cross-references with another scroll, are all connected to the same senatorial family, the Cornelii. Marcus Cornelius Sulla is a wealthy senator with vast estates, extensive business interests, and political ambitions. He opposed Marcus Aurelius's military campaigns, arguing the empire should consolidate rather than expand. But he was overruled, and the wars continue. Now, it seems, he might be sabotaging those wars through economic manipulation. Lucius sits back, his mind racing. This is more than business corruption. This is treason. If Cornelius is deliberately weakening the legions, he's not just stealing money, he's endangering the empire itself. But why? What's his endgame? He reaches for another scroll, this one containing reports from the urban cohorts,
the police force that maintains order in Rome. He's been scanning these reports casually, noting the usual crimes, thefts, assaults, fires. But now, with Cornelius in mind, he looks more carefully. There's a pattern here, too. Over the past month, there have been unusual gatherings in certain districts. Not riots, not protests, just large groups of men meeting in warehouses or private courtyards. The urban cohort reports noted them, but took no action because they weren't overtly illegal. But the locations, Lucius realizes, correspond to properties owned by the Cornelii family. And there's something else. Gladiators have been mentioned in several reports. Not just any gladiators, but fighters from specific schools that train the best warriors in Rome. Why would elite gladiators be gathering at Cornelian properties? Lucius feels ice in his stomach as the pieces come together. This Cornelius isn't just sabotaging the military supply lines, he's preparing something in Rome itself. He's gathering gladiators, trained fighters who are essentially professional killers. He's holding secret meetings, and he's doing all this while the emperor's attention is focused on the northern frontier. This isn't economic crime. This is conspiracy, possibly even an attempted coup. Cornelius might be planning to use his gladiators as a private army to seize control of key points in Rome while the emperor is distracted or weakened. With the legions understrengthened because of diverted supplies, with the city garrison potentially compromised, he might actually succeed. Lucius stands abruptly, the wax tablet falling from his lap. This information needs to reach the emperor immediately. But it's the middle of the night, the second Vigilia. Most of Rome is asleep, in that first period of deep rest. The emperor himself is likely asleep in the Palatine Palace. But that's the advantage of the second Vigilia. Lucius knows from his time at court that Marcus Aurelius follows the traditional Roman sleep pattern. He goes to bed early, sleeps deeply for his first period, then wakes during this second watch to write, think, and conduct business. The emperor might be awake right now, in his private chambers, working on his meditations or reviewing documents. Lucius makes a decision. He'll go to the palace now, during this quiet hour when the conspiracy won't expect anyone to be active, when he can reach the emperor directly, without the usual crowd of courtiers and senators filtering information. The second Vigilia, that time when most people sleep, will be his ally. He dresses quickly in his tribune's uniform, the red cloak marking his rank, the bronze armor polished despite the late hour. He straps his gladius to his side, not expecting to need it, but unwilling to walk Rome's streets unarmed. He wakes Gaius, tells him to stay alert, to bar the door after he leaves.
Stepping out into the night, Lucius enters a different Rome from the one that exists during daylight. The streets are nearly empty, lit only by moonlight and the occasional torch at a shrine or crossroads. The insulae, those massive apartment buildings that house most of Rome's population, rise like cliffs on either side, dark except for a few windows where others also wake during the second Vigilia. The city is quiet, but not silent. Lucius can hear water flowing in the aqueducts that run through and under the city. He can hear dogs barking in the distance, the cry of an infant somewhere above. Occasionally, he passes other people awake during the watch. A baker starting his ovens for morning bread, a priest at a temple shrine performing midnight rituals, a group of vigiles, the night watchmen, making their rounds. The vigiles nod respectfully to his tribune's uniform. They're awake by duty during all the night watches, watching for fires and crime, But even they operate differently during the second Vigilia. This is the quiet watch, when most disturbances have settled from the first part of the night, but dawn is still far off. It's a peaceful time, generally, which makes it perfect for both meditation and, as Lucius now understands, conspiracy. As he walks, Lucius thinks about the peculiar nature of this time. The Romans divide the night into 4 vigiliae, 4 watches of roughly 3 hours each. But the second Vigilia, beginning around midnight, has always been considered special. This is when the gods are most accessible, when prayers are most effective, when the boundary between the living world and the divine realm grows thin. It's also when human minds are clearest. First sleep has provided rest. The body is recovered, but not yet ready for the deep sleep of the later watches. The mind operates in a state between wakefulness and dreams, capable of insights that elude it during busy daylight hours. Every general knows this, every philosopher, every scholar. The second Vigilia is thinking time. Marcus Aurelius himself has written about this in his private journals. Lucius has seen excerpts, passages where the emperor describes waking in the night to contemplate Stoic philosophy, to examine his own actions and motivations. The emperor does his deepest thinking during these hours, which is why Lucius hopes to find him awake. The walk from Lucius's insulae to the Palatine Hill takes perhaps 20 minutes. He crosses the Forum, that great open space that during daylight throngs with thousands of people conducting business, arguing law cases, gossiping, trading. Now it's empty. The temples and basilicas dark, the marble paving stones glowing pale in the moonlight. The Forum looks almost otherworldly at night, like a city of ghosts. The statues of emperors and heroes stand in silent rows, their shadows long and strange. The rostra, the speaker's platform, waits empty for tomorrow's orators. The Sacred Way, Rome's oldest road, stretches before him like a pale ribbon. Lucius has walked this route hundreds of times during daylight, but it feels different now. The second Vigilia transforms Rome, makes it quieter, older, more itself somehow. Without the crowds and noise, you can sense the city's age, its layers of history built upon history, stretching back almost 1,000 years to Romulus and the first settlement. He climbs the Palatine Hill, the slope gradual but steady. The hill is where Rome began, where Romulus supposedly founded the city. Now it's covered with imperial palaces, massive complexes where emperors and their courts live in splendor. Marcus Aurelius's palace is relatively modest by imperial standards, but it's still vast, with multiple courtyards, gardens, and halls.
Guards stand at the palace entrance, Praetorian soldiers in their distinctive armor. They recognize Lucius's uniform and rank, step aside to let him pass. One asks, "Tribune, is the emperor expecting you?" "I have urgent information regarding threats to the empire," Lucius says formally. "I need to see him immediately." The guard hesitates. "The emperor retired hours ago, Tribune. He may be asleep." "Or he may be awake during the second Vigilia, as is his custom," Lucius counters. "Check. Tell him Tribune Corvus has information about senatorial treason." The word treason does it.
One guard hurries inside, while the other keeps Lucius waiting in the entrance portico. Minutes pass. Lucius uses the time to organize his thoughts, preparing to present his evidence clearly and concisely. The guard returns. The emperor is awake in his study. He'll see you. Follow me. They walk through corridors lit by oil lamps in bronze holders, past frescoed walls showing scenes of mythology and history. The palace is quiet but not empty. Slaves move silently on various tasks, and Lucius passes several other officials also awake during the second vigilia, taking advantage of this thinking time to work on their own matters. The emperor's private study is a modest room by palace standards, perhaps 20 feet square, with walls lined with wooden shelves holding scrolls and codices. A large table dominates the center, covered with documents and writing materials. Several oil lamps provide warm light, and at the table, dressed in a simple white tunic rather than imperial purple, sits Marcus Aurelius. The emperor is 60 years old, his beard mostly gray, his face lined with care and illness. The plague that swept the empire didn't spare him entirely. He survived, but it weakened him, aged him beyond his years. Yet his eyes are alert, intelligent, focused completely on Lucius as the tribune enters. "Tribune Corvus," Marcus Aurelius says, his voice calm despite the late hour and the mention of treason. "The guard says you have urgent information. Sit, tell me." Lucius sits, grateful that the emperor doesn't stand on ceremony during the second vigilia. This is thinking time, working time, when normal protocols are relaxed in favor of efficiency. He spreads his wax tablets on the table along with the scrolls he brought. "Caesar, I've been reviewing the military supply reports as you requested. I've found patterns that suggest deliberate sabotage." He walks through his findings methodically. The concentrated shortfalls, the Cornelian connection, the unusual gatherings, the gladiators. Marcus Aurelius listens without interrupting, his expression growing graver as the evidence accumulates. When Lucius finishes, the emperor sits back, silent for a long moment, thinking. "Marcus Cornelius," he says finally. "I know him. Wealthy, ambitious, opposed to the northern campaigns. I didn't think he'd go this far, but gladiators, that's a private army. And if he's weakening the frontier legions, he means to stage a coup, seize power while I'm distracted or dead, or perhaps force me to abdicate by threatening Rome itself." "That's my assessment, Caesar," Lucius confirms. "The question is, what do we do about it? If we move openly during daylight, arrest him in the Senate, he'll have warning. His people will scatter. His gladiators will disappear. We need proof we can present publicly, evidence that will convince the Senate and people." Marcus Aurelius nods slowly. "The second vigilia. This is when we make our move. Now, while most people sleep. Cornelius won't expect action at this hour. He'll think like most Romans do, that important business happens during daylight, that the watchers are for rest or private matters."
He stands, suddenly energized despite the late hour. This is what the second vigilia offers, the clarity to see problems and the mental energy to act on them. "I'll summon the Praetorian prefect, the urban prefect, and the tribune of the vigiles. We'll conduct raids simultaneously on all Cornelian properties where these gatherings have occurred. We'll seize the gladiators, secure the evidence, arrest the conspirators. All during the second vigilia, before most of Rome wakes for their second sleep." "Caesar," Lucius says carefully, "moving the entire Praetorian Guard at night
will wake the city. Word will spread. Cornelius has allies, people who might warn him. Then we don't move the entire guard. We select small teams of the most trusted men. We move quietly, quickly, during this watch when even night owls are drowsy and inattentive. Surprise is our advantage. Speed is our weapon. And the second Vigilia itself is our ally, because this is when minds are clearest, when decisions come most naturally. Over the next hour, still during the second Vigilia, the Emperor's study becomes a command center. Officials arrive in twos and threes, summoned from their own midnight wakefulness or roused from first sleep. Marcus Aurelius explains the situation, assigns tasks, coordinates the operation with the precision of the military commander he once was. Maps are spread on tables, showing Rome's districts and the Cornelian properties. Teams are assigned to each location. Orders are written and sealed, messengers prepare to carry them. All of this happens in near silence, with the focused efficiency that comes during the second Vigilia, when minds are sharp but the world is quiet. Lucius is assigned to lead one team, targeting the largest Cornelian warehouse where the gladiators reportedly gather. He's given 20 Praetorian soldiers, men chosen for loyalty and discretion. They'll move through the streets while most of Rome still sleeps, arriving at the warehouse just as the second Vigilia ends and the third begins. As they prepare to leave, Marcus Aurelius calls Lucius aside. "Tribune, you did well. You used the second Vigilia as it's meant to be used, for clear thinking and important work. This is when the mind is uncluttered by the day's noise, when you can see patterns others miss. Remember this: the hours between sleeps are when empires are saved or lost." Lucius salutes and leaves with his team. They move through Rome's streets, still dark, still quiet, though here and there he sees signs of the second Vigilia ending, lights being extinguished, people returning to their beds for second sleep. The world is transitioning, and Lucius and his soldiers are moving against that transition, staying alert while others prepare to rest again. The Cornelian warehouse is near the Tiber, in a district of merchants and traders. During daylight, it's busy and crowded. Now it's silent, dark, but not empty. Lucius can see faint light seeping through cracks in the shuttered windows, can hear voices from within, multiple men talking. He signals his soldiers into position, surrounding the warehouse. Then, on his mark, they strike. The main doors burst open, soldiers pouring through, shouting in the Emperor's name. Inside, perhaps 30 men are gathered, some sleeping, some awake during the second Vigilia, and at least half of them are gladiators, their muscular physiques and scarred bodies unmistakable.
There's a moment of confusion, of shouting and scrambling. Some gladiators reach for weapons, but the Praetorians are faster, more organized, moving with military precision. "In the Emperor's name, you're under arrest for conspiracy against the state. Drop your weapons." Most do. A few try to fight or flee, but they're quickly subdued. Lucius moves through the warehouse, examining what's there. Weapons, definitely. More than any legitimate business would need. Maps of Rome showing key buildings and roads, and documents, correspondence between Cornelius and the gladiator schools, contracts for security services that are clearly fronts for gathering a private army. This is the evidence they need. Concrete, undeniable proof of conspiracy. Lucius secures it all carefully,
knowing it will be presented to the Senate, knowing it needs to be beyond question. Similar raids are happening simultaneously across Rome, at Cornelian estates, at other warehouses, at the homes of known conspirators. The Praetorians move through the second Vigilia like ghosts, striking before anyone can react or send warning. By the time the third Vigilia begins, by the time most Romans are entering their second sleep, the conspiracy has been dismantled. Marcus Cornelius himself is arrested at his villa, roused from his own first sleep by Praetorians who surround his bed. He's given no time to dress properly, no chance to destroy evidence or coordinate a response. He's simply taken into custody, still wearing his sleeping tunic, confused and angry and frightened all at once. As dawn breaks, Rome awakes to find the conspiracy already defeated. The Senate convenes to hear the evidence, which is overwhelming. Cornelius and his key allies are condemned, their property confiscated, their names stricken from the records. Some are exiled, others executed. The gladiators, deemed dupes rather than true conspirators, are dispersed to different schools and closely monitored. The empire has been saved, and the second Vigilia made it possible. That hour of clarity between sleeps allowed Lucius to analyze patterns and draw connections. It gave Marcus Aurelius the mental acuity to plan and coordinate a complex operation. It provided the quiet cover under which that operation could be executed before conspirators could react. In the days that follow, Lucius receives formal recognition from the emperor. But the real reward, Marcus Aurelius tells him privately, is understanding the power of the second Vigilia. The Romans of old knew this, the emperor says. They structured the night into watches, recognizing that wakefulness has rhythms, that there are optimal times for different activities. The second Vigilia is for thinking, for deciding, for acting with clarity. We're losing this knowledge, he continues, a note of sadness in his voice. As more people use oil lamps to extend their days, as the city grows and never fully sleeps, the natural rhythms break down. Someday, perhaps, Romans will sleep straight through the night, never experiencing this clarity. They'll wonder why their ancestors were wiser, made better decisions, built this empire. Part of the answer will be that we understood the night, worked with it rather than against it. Lucius nods, understanding. He's seen it himself, felt it himself. The second Vigilia offers something that can't be replicated during daylight hours or artificial wakefulness. It's a natural state of consciousness, rested but alert, quiet but focused, ideal for the kind of deep thinking that changes outcomes.
Years later, retired and living quietly on a small estate outside Rome, Lucius still maintains the Vigilia pattern. He wakes naturally after first sleep, spends an hour or two writing, reading, thinking, then returns to bed for second sleep. His mind stays sharp despite his age. His body aches from old wounds, but his thinking remains clear. He writes his own memoirs during these hours, recording his experiences serving Marcus Aurelius, including the conspiracy and its discovery. He describes how the second Vigilia made the difference, how that hour of clarity allowed him to see patterns and make connections that would have eluded him during the noise and distraction of daylight Rome. His grandson, a young man of 20, sometimes stays with him and observes this practice with curiosity. "Grandfather, why do you wake in the middle of the night? It seems inconvenient. Why not sleep straight through, then work during the day like everyone else?" Lucius smiles at this, recognizing how much has changed even in one generation. Everyone else doesn't sleep straight through, not naturally. Your body wants to wake during the second vigilia. Try it. Go to bed at sunset, sleep without forcing it, and see what happens around midnight or after. You'll wake, naturally, peacefully, and in that waking, you'll find a clarity you never experienced during the day. The grandson tries it, more to humor the old man than from genuine belief, but he does wake, just as Lucius predicted, after about 4 hours of sleep. At first, he's frustrated, wants to force himself back to sleep immediately. But Lucius talks to him, keeps him up, shows him how to use the time. They sit together in the atrium under stars, talking philosophy, history, life. The young man experiences something he's never felt before, a kind of peaceful alertness, a state where his mind works but isn't frantic, where thoughts come clearly but without pressure. It's different from daylight thinking, different from the forced wakefulness of staying up too late. It's natural, restful even, while being wakeful. This is what Rome is losing, Lucius tells him. This clarity, this natural rhythm. We're replacing it with artificial schedules, trying to bend our bodies to fit our social desires rather than working with our natural patterns. And we're becoming lesser for it, making worse decisions, thinking less clearly, losing something essential about what it means to be human. After that night, the grandson sometimes practices the second vigilia himself, especially when he has important decisions to make or problems to solve. He notices the difference, the way his mind works during these hours. He begins to understand what his grandfather has been teaching him. But he also notices that his friends think it strange. Among Rome's youth, the fashionable thing is to stay up late at parties, sleep until midday, live disconnected from natural rhythms. The idea of going to bed at sunset and waking during the night is considered old-fashioned, rustic, something rodal people do, not sophisticated Romans. The class implications of sleep patterns are becoming increasingly apparent. The wealthy can afford oil lamps, can extend their days artificially, can party through the hours when their bodies want to sleep. The poor, who can't afford expensive oil lamp, still follow natural patterns by necessity, which marks them as lower class. Sleep itself is being stratified by social class, with natural patterns seen as inferior to civilized artificial ones. This is a profound shift in Roman culture, one that will have consequences no one yet fully understands. When your sleep becomes a status symbol, when following your body's natural rhythms marks you as unsophisticated, something fundamentally changed in how you relate to yourself and nature.
The Roman military continues to maintain the Vigilia system longest because it works, because soldiers on campaign can't rely on artificial light and need to stay alert during watches. The 4 Vigiliae structure persists in military contexts for centuries, with the second Vigilia
still recognized as optimal for planning and command decisions. Military manuals of the period discuss the second vigilia explicitly. They recommend that commanders use this time to review intelligence, plan operations, make strategic decisions. The manuals note that the mind is clearest during these hours, that information absorbed during the second vigilia is retained better, that judgments made then are typically sound. Gladiator training continues to use biphasic sleep patterns extensively. Trainers wake fighters during the second vigilia for intense training sessions, believing this builds both physical stamina and mental toughness. A gladiator who can wake alert, fight effectively, then return to sleep has an advantage in the arena, where every edge matters. The practice also has practical benefits for training schedules. During the day, the sun in the arena is brutal, especially in summer. Training during the second vigilia in the cool of night by torchlight is more comfortable and allows for longer, more intense sessions. The fighters learn to perform when tired, when conditions aren't ideal, which prepares them for the unpredictability of actual combat. Some gladiator schools even advertise this training method, claiming it produces superior fighters, and the evidence suggests they're right. Schools that maintain the vigilia training pattern tend to produce more successful fighters, though whether this is due to the sleep pattern itself or the overall discipline it represents is debatable. The medical community also recognizes the second vigilia's benefits. Physicians like Galen write about natural sleep patterns, describing the two-phase sleep as normal and healthy. Galen himself maintains this pattern, using the second vigilia for studying medical texts and writing his own treatises that will influence medicine for over 1,000 years. Galen notes that patients who follow natural sleep patterns tend to heal better, have more stable moods, think more clearly. He recommends that people stop fighting against the natural wake period, stop trying to force continuous sleep, and instead accept the vigilia pattern as healthy and normal. But he also observes that fewer people are listening, that the trend toward artificial schedules is accelerating. Temple priests maintain the vigilia system because many religious observances are tied to specific hours of the night. The second vigilia is considered particularly auspicious for certain rituals when the veil between the mortal and divine realms is thinnest. Priests wake to perform these rituals, and in doing so, they experience that clarity of mind that comes naturally during this period. Some temples develop extensive philosophies around the second vigilia. The priests of Apollo, god of prophecy and knowledge, teach that insights received during the second vigilia are more reliable, more likely to be genuine divine communication, rather than wishful thinking or imagination. They train oracles and seers to wake during this time, to receive visions and prophecies in the quiet clarity between sleeps.
The Vestal Virgins, who maintain Rome's sacred flame, work in shifts through all the Vigiliae. But the second Vigiliae is considered the most important, when the flame is at its most significant, when tending it has the most spiritual meaning. Senior Vestals often take the second Vigiliae shift themselves, using the time not just to maintain the flame, but to meditate, pray, and contemplate sacred mysteries. Philosophers continue to praise the second Vigiliae as ideal for their work. The Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, use it for self-examination and ethical reflection. The Epicureans use it for studying natural philosophy and contemplating the nature of pleasure and pain. The Platonists use it for meditation on ideal forms and mathematical truths. There's something about the second Vigiliae that facilitates philosophical thinking. The mind is rested but not yet saturated with the day's concerns. The world is quiet, free from distractions. The body is comfortable, neither too tired nor too energized. This combination creates optimal conditions for abstract thinking, for following arguments to their conclusions, for insights that restructure understanding. Some philosophers go so far as to claim that philosophy itself requires the second Vigiliae, that genuine philosophical thinking can't happen in the noise and distraction of daylight. While this is probably an exaggeration, there's truth in recognizing that certain types of thinking benefit from certain conditions, and the second Vigiliae provides ideal conditions for philosophy. Poets and writers also discover the second Vigiliae's benefits. The creative state that comes during this time, when the mind is relaxed but alert, when imagination flows freely but can still be directed and shaped, is ideal for composition. Many of Rome's greatest literary works are written during these hours, though the authors rarely mention this explicitly. Virgil, the epic poet, was known to maintain the Vigiliae pattern, waking during the second watch to compose verses of the Aeneid. Horace describes in his poems the pleasure of waking in the night to write by lamplight, the special quality of creativity that comes during these hours. Ovid, before his exile, used the second Vigiliae for working on his Metamorphoses, that sprawling collection of mythological tales. The pattern these artists follow isn't random or quirky. They've discovered, through experience, that the second Vigiliae offers something valuable for creative work. The state of consciousness during this time, neither fully awake nor dreaming, allows for the kind of associative thinking that generates new ideas, metaphors, narrative connections. But as Rome's empire expands and becomes more complex, as urban life becomes more detached from natural rhythms, the Vigiliae pattern begins to seem increasingly old-fashioned. Very success of Roman civilization, the development of technologies like better lamps, the growth of cities that never fully sleep, creates conditions that undermine the natural patterns that helped build that civilization. By the late Empire, 2 or 3 centuries after Marcus Aurelius, the pattern has largely disappeared from urban Roman life. Only in rural areas, in military camps, and in some traditional religious communities does it persist. The knowledge isn't entirely lost, but it becomes marginal, something old people remember, but young people don't practice.
Marcus Aurelius returns to his meditations during the second Vigilia, recording thoughts that will survive 2 millennia and become one of the foundational texts of Western philosophy. He doesn't write during the day when his time is consumed by audiences, petitions, ceremonies. He writes in the quiet hours between sleeps, when his mind can range freely over questions of virtue, duty, and the nature of the universe. Lucius returns to his normal duties, but he's changed by the experience. He protects his second Vigilia jealously now, uses it for his most important thinking and work. He notices how much clearer his mind is during these hours, how problems that seem intractable during daylight often resolve themselves when examined between sleeps. He also notices that this pattern is indeed fading in Rome. Wealthy people are using more oil lamps, extending their evening activities, going to bed later. They're sleeping through what should be the second Vigilia, trying to get all their sleep in one continuous block. They complain of insomnia, of disturbed sleep, not realizing they're fighting against their own biology. The gladiator trainers still maintain the traditional pattern, Lucius learns. They wake their fighters during the second Vigilia for training, believing correctly that this develops stamina and mental toughness. A fighter who can wake alert between sleeps, perform at high level, then return to second sleep, has an advantage over one who requires uninterrupted rest. Military commanders on campaign still follow the Vigilia system, the 4 watches of the night, with the second watch considered optimal for planning and decision-making. But in Rome itself, in the civilian population, the pattern is slowly eroding under the influence of artificial light and changing social customs. Pliny the Elder, the famous natural historian, has written about his own use of the second Vigilia for study and writing. He describes waking naturally after a few hours of sleep, working by lamplight on his encyclopedic natural history, then returning to bed for second sleep before dawn. He considers this the most productive time for intellectual work, when the mind is fresh, but the world is quiet. But Pliny is old-fashioned in this regard, Lucius realizes. Younger Romans, especially the wealthy and fashionable, are adopting new patterns. They're having elaborate dinner parties that extend late into the night, drinking and socializing until the second or even third Vigilia. Then they sleep straight through to late morning, missing the dawn entirely. This new pattern is seen as sophisticated, cosmopolitan, a mark of refinement. The old pattern, going to bed at sunset and waking during the second Vigilia, is becoming associated with farmers and simple folk. It's being lost, not because it doesn't work, but because it's no longer fashionable. Marcus Aurelius dies in March of 180 AD, just a few months after the conspiracy was foiled. His last meditations were written during the second Vigilia, sitting in his field headquarters on the northern frontier, thinking about virtue, death, and duty
as his own death approached. The text survives, read by generations who have no idea it was composed during those quiet hours between first and second sleep. Lucius continues to serve Rome under Marcus's son Commodus, though the new emperor is nothing like his father. Commodus doesn't maintain the second Vigilia practice. He stays up late partying, sleeps through the morning, lives by artificial schedules detached from natural rhythms. His reign will be chaotic and eventually end in assassination, and historians will debate why such a wise father produced such a troubled son. But Lucius will wonder if part of the answer lies in sleep patterns. Marcus Aurelius used the second Vigilia for deep thinking, for examining his own character and motivations, for disciplining his mind and spirit. Commodus never develops this practice, never experiences that clarity between sleeps. Perhaps that makes a difference in how they rule, how they think, who they become.